Hi everyone, I hope you've had a great start to the year and I hope you're making good progress towards your fitness goals. Today I want to speak about one very particular kind of fitness goal, which is where you set yourself a goal to do an exercise that you can't currently do. Common examples of this normally include things like push-ups and pull-ups, but you could also apply this information to things like dips. They're a very popular exercise that people can't always do and don't always know how to get to the point of doing one. Glute ham raises are another really important one, especially if you're interested in strength and conditioning, maybe some injury prevention for your sport. And some other examples might be things like pistol squats, although they tend to have not just strength components, which is what we're mainly going to focus on today, but also mobility and skill components as well. That also applies to things like muscle ups, where they do require a very important strength component and you do need to be able to build up your strength to be able to do them, but there are also more technical components. We'll touch on that a little bit today. We're mainly going to be talking about exercises that are a little bit more simple from a skill standard, but you have to focus on building the right amount of strength to be able to do them. So the first thing we're going to talk about in relation to building up your ability to do an exercise that you can't currently do is doing negatives or eccentrics. This is where you get yourself to the kind of top of a movement, the part where you would have just completed a full rep and you're going to lower yourself into another rep or back to the start position. So an example of this might be where you jump up to the top of a pull-up bar where your arms are bent and you're right at the top of that bar and you're going to lower yourself down really slowly to the beginning of that position. Something like a push-up or a dip, that might involve you starting with your arms out completely straight and you're going to lower yourself to the bottom of that dip or that push-up. Now these are a really good way to build strength in a movement you can't currently do, because a negative or an eccentric movement where a muscle is lengthening under tension is a phase of movement where we have great potential for strength. We can produce a lot of force there, which is why people that actually can't do pull-ups yet can still lower themselves quite nicely under control a lot of the time. Now the reason these are so important, and this is something I've spoken about a lot in the past, the reason these are so important is because if you can't yet do an exercise, let's say you can't do one push-up, then a push-up with your body weight, we need to think about it in terms of your repetition maximum, in terms of how many reps you can do of a given exercise. If you can't do a push-up yet, then that exercise is more than 100% of your one repetition maximum, because you can't do one. So unlike traditional strength training where we can work at a percentage of your one rep max and maybe find out what you can do for 3 reps or 5 reps, we know the answer to that question in this case is going to be 0 because you can't do one. So we need to find other ways to expose you to that load in a way you can control. The negatives, because we are stronger in the eccentric portion of a lift, that is a very loadable, very trainable part that we can do. Exercises where you do a negative or an eccentric and a muscle is lengthening under tension can cause quite a lot of soreness and quite a lot of fatigue, especially if you're going into a real deep range of motion where the muscle is stretching quite a bit as well. That means that with negatives, you do have to manage your volume quite sensibly. You can be quite minimalist with negatives because you are going to get diminishing returns as that fatigue builds up, and you are going to have a bit of a struggle to recover over the next couple of days after you've done them. Anyone who's done a set of really slow negative glute ham raises or hamstring Nordics will know what I'm talking about with that. So negatives are a very important first step in your training towards an exercise you can't do, but you do need to use them in like a conservative way. The second step with building yourself up to the exercise you can't do yet is to do band assisted variations. And there are other forms of assistance that we'll talk about in a bit, but band assistance is something that can usually be applied in most gyms where you can do the exercise you're building towards. So for example, you can put a band around your hips and attach it to a squat bar to pull yourself out of a push-up. You can put a band around your knees to push yourself out of a dip or a pull-up. Glute ham raises, there are some variations where you can put a band around your hips to pull you out of it. They can be a bit harder to set up, it depends what you're using. But you've also, with glute ham raises, because you're going down to the floor, you've got the option of kind of pushing yourself out of that to alleviate some of the tension on the hamstrings. But sticking to the band assisted variations for now, they are a good way of starting to improve your ability to do the concentric, the shortening or lifting part of the movement, but they come with their own drawbacks as well. So obviously a band's level of resistance is not linear. The more the band stretches, the more tension there is on the band, meaning the part of the movement where you are furthest away from the band attachment, where the band is at its longest, is the point where you're going to get the most assistance. And the point where the band is shortest, where you're closest to the band attachment, is where you're going to get the least assistance. So on a band pull-up or a band dip, you'll get the most assistance in the bottom part of the movement. So on a pull-up, that's where you're hanging down with your arms out nice and straight. And on the dip, that's going to be where your arms are really bent and you're really close to those dip handles. And then you'll get the most assistance at the top when you're at the top of the pull-up bar or at the top of the dip. So bands are really useful for helping you with those exercises, but they aren't going to strengthen each part of the movement equally. And that's something you need to bear in mind. It's why a lot of people, a real bugbear of mine is that trainers on social media, they love to say you should do negative pull-ups and you should do band pull-ups and that will get you your first pull-up. And while they are really useful, really important exercises, neither of them really help you at the bottom part of a pull-up. So getting started and starting yourself from pulling on that first pull-up can still feel like it's a million miles away. And it's why you see so many people who kind of graduate towards doing full pull-ups, but they don't get a full lockout at the bottom of the pull-up. They don't have a dead hang. Likewise, things like dips and push-ups, where you see people start to cut their depth a little bit. They don't go as low as they get tired or when they're trying to progress too quickly. So bands, again, very good, very convenient, but they're not going to give you the full range of motion on their own. This moves us quite nicely onto the next one, which is going to be isometric holds. This is where you hold a part of the movement statically and work on building some strength there. So again, this might be a way to build strength in a really specific part of the movement without having to be capable of doing the full lift yet. So you can hang out at the bottom of a push-up or at the top of a pull-up, and those movements will help you build some strength in and around those portions. Isometric work tends to not be too strenuous because the muscle isn't changing lengths and you're not working for a full range of motion. So you can tend to be able to work these things in as accessory exercises and you'll build some useful strength there as well. You can't really base a whole program around isometric exercises, but again, as a nice assistance exercise, they are pretty handy. Moving on to one of the most useful things you can do to build yourself up to that exercise that you can't do yet is to find an assisted machine if your gym has them. Now, this is mainly referring to your pull-ups and your dips, where you see those machines that have a little platform that you put your knees on, and there's like a weight stack behind the machine, and that forces the platform to rise as you push yourself or pull yourself up towards the bar. So if you're doing a dip, as you're pushing yourself up, that platform will rise as well, and it will lift you at the same time. And the same goes for pull-ups. These are really good because the assistance you get is consistent throughout all of the movement. So it's unlike a band where you're finding one part of the movement quite easy and one part quite hard. You tend to be working all the way through. Not every gym has them though, so if you have them, great. If you don't have them, it might be a little bit harder to build up to. I personally found that when I was trying to do dips for the first time, I worked in several gyms that didn't have one of those assisted machines, and I would do banded dips, I would do negative dips, and I never quite got towards that full dip because I wasn't building strength in the bottom portion of the dip. It was only when I started training in a gym that had an assisted dip machine that I finally got through to my first dips. And at that point, it only took me about 5-6 weeks to get there because I'd already done so much of the other work. But I did need that assisted work to help me throughout the whole movement before I could get there. And then the last thing you've got is specific drilling work. So this will be very dependent on the exercise, and this might be where we talk a bit more about things like muscle ups and pistol squats, where there is a skill component, a mobility component. And it might just be that you have very specific exercises that help you work on the skills in relation to those. This completely isn't my forte, so I'm not going to dive into it too much, but YouTube channels based around calisthenics and things like that tend to be a really useful tool for finding those exercises that you need to build the skills. However, to give you one example of something I have used, when I was learning how to do my dips, I was a bit nervous about putting my shoulder in that very protracted position where your elbow is really far back and your shoulder is forward. And I'm sticking my arm out to the side just so you can see. But I was very nervous of that position because, you know, previously in my career, it had been drilled into me that these positions were really dangerous, and if I did them, my shoulder was going to explode. And obviously injury and pain is a bit more nuanced than that, and I'm beyond that point. But I had still avoided that position for many years, and I was nervous that if I put my body weight into that position all in one go, that wasn't going to be great for me. So I found a exercise that I'm not going to say I invented it, but I kind of tweaked an exercise a little bit to suit my needs, which was to do push-ups on a TRX, or, you know, suspension handles, if you know those. And what I did was I went into my push-up really low to the point where the push-up forced me into that more protracted position, and I kind of exaggerated that more than I needed to. And I spent maybe 3 or 4 weeks there just building my strength up in that position so that the front of my shoulder had a bit more tolerance for the dips as well. And that could have just been a psychological component. That might have just been about building my confidence and my familiarity there, but I did find it quite helpful. And I've used that with a couple of clients who I progressed towards dips as well. Just so I feel like we both know we've been in that position, we've loaded it, we've built up our tolerance to it, and we're ready to start progressing into something harder. So that's it for the video. Hopefully once I edit this down, it's a bit quicker than some of my recent videos, which have been quite long. But yes, those are the components that are going to help you build up to exercises you can't do yet. I always say this to everyone, you can't just look at Instagram and see that someone's put up 2 exercises and that's going to get you your first push-up or your first pull-up. It is more nuanced than that. You have got to look at all the different ways you can train the movement. And the other thing that's really important is program design. Program design is often neglected in these videos. Like I say, you have got to appreciate that if you can't do an exercise yet, it is more than your 1 rep max. So you have to be very clever and very indirect about the way you train it. But that's quite a big topic on its own. Hopefully if you use a variety of these methods that I've talked about here, that can start to get you closer. And if you have any questions about how to design a program around that, then you can ask in the comments below. Thank you for watching, everyone. If this is your first time looking at this channel, then hopefully you stick around and look at some other videos as well. I really like talking about strength training, strength and conditioning, motivation and goal setting, and all those kind of things that are related to the gym. I try to have some fun as well with some funny shorts and some gaming related stuff as well. But if you like the sound of any of that, please make sure you like and subscribe and share this video to someone that you know who needs help building their push-ups or their pull-ups or something like that. And I will see you again soon.